Hey guys, and welcome back to Battlefront updates, and a quite lengthy news update because it dropped both the lightsaber combat and update community transmission at the same time, and they are both really long. So I'm simply gonna jump straight into it and try to boil down the important stuff, because I made sure to read through most of it before actually doing this video, because if I were to read this from start to bottom, this video would literally be 40 minutes long. But that's good, because they're giving us a lot of juicy details here. So I thought we'd start off with the lightsaber combat. So for this update, they are focusing on stagger and remaking the stamina system, basically. So if we start off with stagger, one of the most visible changes to lightsaber combat is going to come in the form of the removal of the stagger for attacking heroes. In the current version of the game, when a hero attacks a blocking hero, the attacker will stagger backwards. And well, they agree on the feedback, simply put, and it kind of breaks the flow of lightsaber combat. So now you will no longer stagger backwards if you hit someone who is blocking. And you can also chain attacks until they run out of stamina. And that's also another new change to that, where if you run out of stamina, you can no longer attack. Previously you can slash forever, but now that means that you need to actually be careful with when you're attacking. And I think this is something that will probably take some getting used to, because obviously you're used to kind of slashing your way and just killing everyone. But now if you run out of stamina, you can either block or slash, making you fairly vulnerable. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. And of course, blocking with a lightsaber also reduces the hero's stamina, so you won't be able to block forever either. And something interesting I found there when I was looking at the different numbers are that some heroes can actually do more attacks than they can do blocks, and the other way around. So this means that, for instance, I was thinking if you're blocking, you might always run out of stamina compared to the person who is attacking. But that's not going to be the case, because the values are different between the heroes depending on their playstyle, and similarly. So after a while, you might learn that some heroes can block less, some can attack more, and so on. So it's, well, the best lightsaber combat players will probably be the ones who know exactly how many times a particular hero can block, although I don't think I personally will be able to memorize all of that. But there are a lot of numbers in there that you can make use of if you well, if you have the mind for it, and if you want to go really hardcore into the lightsaber combat. They've made changes to pretty much all of the heroes' stamina values, which I will be getting to in a second. But they've also done some additional changes to Maul, Rey, and Vader. This is, first of all, that Maul will actually have now a stamina cost to his lightsaber hits, which I know might disappoint some people, but I also did notice that they buffed up his damage, so that he will now be able to do 150 damage from the back, and therefore one-shot normal troopers unless they're boosted. So it's kind of like, it makes sense for heroes versus villains, and then they buff up the health, and then they buff up the damage a little bit, so that he won't struggle as much against actual troopers. So I'm not too concerned, honestly, about Maul having stamina to his attacks. And since stamina is now so important in the game, they have adjusted both Rey's Insight and Darth Vader's Focus Rage, which previously gave them unlimited stamina, and now they will instead give a 50% reduction to the stamina cost, which I guess makes sense if they're actually focusing on making the lightsaber combat a bit more balanced. And then we get over to the actual numbers and the values, which is where it gets a little bit confusing. The 6 main values is the cost to actually hit with the melee, the cost to deflect a blaster, the cost to deflect a lightsaber, the delay for how long it takes for your stamina to start recharging, and then also how long it takes to recharge that stamina, and lastly the spread from which you can deflect blaster fire, which means that some heroes might be able to deflect more narrowly than others. And something that is a little bit strange here is that both Yoda and Maul has blocking values both on blasters and on lightsabers. It could indicate that they are getting a lightsaber and blaster block. Well, Yoda already has a blaster block, but I don't think that's the case, because that would probably have been mentioned in that case. So I think it's basically just an oversight or similarly, but right now we don't really have any specifics or clarification on what that means. And the actual values we've got here are those 6. And if you take a look at this chart, they show us the values in terms of how many attacks or how many blaster bolts you can block, or how many melee hit deflect. At first, the numbers actually had a value, which made it kind of more confusing, I would say. This makes more sense, because now you can get a really good idea here. For instance, if you look at the amount of melee attacks someone can do, Vader has the lowest with 8. Whereas Kylo, Maul, and Dooku has the highest with 14. However, if you then move on to the blaster deflect amount, Vader is at the top there because, well, he's pretty good at blocking blasters from which we've seen. But Obi-Wan and Yoda are also pretty high up there. And then obviously at the bottom we have Grievous, who can only block 5 lightsaber bolts before he runs out of stamina. So this is something that's going to be very interesting. For instance, we've all known that Grievous cannot block a lot of blaster fire, but right now in the game you can block 5 blaster bolts, or however many he can block now, but then you can slash after that, and that's not the case now. So you gotta make sure, so you gotta remember that your attacking is actually dependent on your defending, if that makes sense. So it's something people really gotta keep in mind. And then if you take a look at the amount of melee hits that the different heroes can deflect, Obi-Wan is at the top with 25, and then this kind of evenly spread out between 10 to 14 to the rest of the heroes. And then if we get over to the regen delay, which is how many seconds it takes after your last block or hit that the regeneration actually starts. And Vader is the slowest there with 3 seconds of a delay, and then Luke, Yoda, Rey and Obi-Wan are the ones with the fastest regen delay. And then we have the regen speed, which is basically how many seconds from the start of that regen until you have full stamina. And it's fairly evenly spread here, the fastest ones being Rey and Anakin, and then the slowest ones being Vader, Grievous, Obi-Wan and Luke. So the most important value is pretty much adding up the regen delay and the regen speed, because that's how long it's going to take from your last hit until you are fully recharged. And the slowest ones there are Vader, and the fastest one is actually Rey, followed by Anakin and I think Yoda. And then lastly we had a deflect spread, angle multiplier. This is a bit confusing because this seems like it's actually deflect and not just block, because Yoda has 0 value here, which probably means that he can't deflect the blaster bolts, he absorbs them. But then Grievous has 20, which I'm not really sure what that means. Can he block from every direction at once? Maybe that's the case, I'm actually not sure, because all of the other heroes are sitting in between 0.2 and 0.45. And I just realized while actually editing this video that what they mean with this is probably the angle and the spread of the blaster bolts you are deflecting back. So when you put it at 0.45, that means it's going to be really narrow when you deflect it, but if you put it at 20 degrees, that means that most of the shots Grievous deflects will not hit anyone. So that's basically what it means. It's not the angle from which you can deflect, but it's probably the angle at which you deflect it back. So obviously there's a lot of values to dive into here, and I don't want to get into too much details here. The other value that they show us here is basically the damage that all of the heroes do with their lightsabers, both the base damage, max damage, and the extra damage from behind, plus the max from behind. And this was actually something that I didn't know, that you could do different amounts of damage. Because this is not like max damage is not base damage plus max from behind damage, which makes this really confusing. Like, when does Anakin do 140 damage and when does he do 165? I'm not quite sure there, but the actual patch notes that I will be moving over to in a second shows the heroes that they've changed this value for, such as Darth Maul, where he now does 150 with the behind plus max damage. But obviously, as you can see here, some of the heroes that do the most damage with the lightsabers are Anakin and Dooku, which is kind of the same that they, well, still are. But now I wanted to move over to the actual patch notes, where we got a lot of things to go through, or the actual Capital Supremacy update community transmission, as it's called. And the first couple of sections cover the Capital Supremacy mode, the Infiltrator reinforcement, and the lightsaber combat changes, with some quick kind of recaps of them. But I've already covered all of these in their individual community transmissions, so go back and check out those videos if you want the details, or obviously the lightsaber combat I just talked about. But we have a pretty long list of actual patch changes here that I wanted to dive into. But before I do that, I wanted to mention something interesting, because they actually edited this out shortly after this was published, but at the end of the Capital Supremacy part it said that the mode launches with a new Geonosis map and will get further map support in the coming updates. Which shows that they kind of wanted to tell us that, but they're not allowed to, I guess. And then out on Twitter, when I tweeted about this, Ben just responded with Geonosis, nothing else, which is strange to say the least, and I think it refers to the good old times back in, I don't know, it was June, May or something like that, where they randomly put Geonosis in the patch notes and then removed it. People think it was the hint, but it maybe wasn't. I don't know. It kind of refers back to that, I think. So yeah, I think they simply want to tell us that more maps are coming for this game mode, but they can't say it officially yet. So instead they do this little I don't know, work around that. I hope they don't get into too much trouble for. But now back to the patch notes. And first of all, we of course have the new content features, which is the new mode, the new map, the insides of the Republic attack cruiser and dreadnought, the AI that are being added as a part of this game mode, infiltrator reinforcement, and also the new appearance for Count Dooku, the exquisite pajamas, which will be available to unlock for credits and crystals, and they have also added Geonosis Trippa Hive to Hero Showdown. In terms of quality of life, we got a new look for the emote wheel on the collection menu that has been updated to be consistent with the in-game emote wheel. And also with Capital Supremacy, they have adjusted the battle point cost to reflect the change in value that the new reinforcements introduce. And you can see those values on the screen right now. I'm not 100% sure if these are just the values for Capital Supremacy or if it's for all game modes. But we'll see tomorrow when the update is out. And then we have a massive list of hero changes. First of all, the improved lightsaber combat that I have already covered, so I'm going to skip that part. But then we have the rebalanced damage for some of the existing lightsaber heroes. And this is the important part to keep note, because that whole chart might not tell you too much that I showed earlier unless you knew all the current values. Because for instance here, Darth Maul's lightsaber damage has been increased from 100 to 120 and the back bonus from 20 to 30, which means that you can now do 150 damage from the back instead of 120. So that's still a pretty big change, because obviously you will be able to one-shot a lot of troopers. The same goes for Vader's, which has been increased from 120 to 130 and 20 to 30 from the back. So you can now do up to 160 damage from the back, meaning that he can also one-shot trooper, which I think reflects his kind of, I guess, nerf to the stamina well. And Yoda's lightsaber has been boosted from 115 to 125 and 20 to 25 from the back, which again also means that the lightsaber can kill from the back. So it basically seems like they're going for a level where all heroes can one-shot with a lightsaber from the back and some of them can from the front. Luke's has also been boosted from 100 to 120 and back damage from 20 to 30, adding up to 150 in total. And lastly, Rey's lightsaber damage from 110 to 120, which only puts her at 140, but they do say that the max damage is 130 in the actual chart. So again, it gets a bit confusing here. I'm not sure what max damage is, if that's just like a random value that where sometimes triggers extra damage. Not sure. But if you hit that max damage, you should still be able to one-shot from the back. And here's a very big change. Fixed an issue that would allow certain heroes and troopers to still shoot or block during the falling or freezing animations. This basically made knocking down with any type of ability completely useless, or almost useless, but now that's not the case. So I'm very glad that they have changed that, and I know it's just one point in a big list, but out of all of these changes, it's actually one of the biggest ones in my opinion. Also some fixes to Kylo Ren's pull and Maul's chokehold, where they would apparently activate twice sometimes, and not really seen that happen. And I'm so glad to see this after finally, well, a year and 3 months or something. They have fixed several issues with weapons not outlining properly, which includes Lando Calrissian's Night Sniper, Bosk's predatory ability, and Boba Fett's for the hunt ability. And also I can mention that further down the list, that also applies to all the similar effects of normal troopers, like the thermal binoculars, the actual night vision scopes on the different blasters and so on. It's also a very big fix, as you could really struggle with Bosk's predatory ability if you're like inside on Hoth and it does not work because you can't see the enemies. So another very good bug fix that has been long awaited. If we then move on to Anakin Skywalker, they have improved the timing of his abilities to allow for more timely attacks after an ability is performed, which kind of sounds like a buff. And then they've adjusted the button placement for the abilities, so now the pull will be to the left, which I think makes sense. That's how it is for the other heroes, and that's how it should have been initially. And then they fixed the bug where you couldn't attack or cast abilities if you were stunned during the retribution ability, and some description text fixes. So no nerf for Anakin, which is interesting. We'll see how that plays out with this whole stamina changes and everything. Fixed an issue where Luke Skywalker had some issues with the star cards being unequipped. I've seen a lot of you complain about that. Not something I've personally noticed, but good to see. Obi-Wan has now had an increase to his restrictive mind trick from 3 to 4.5 seconds, and an issue where it would stop people from using their secondary fire. For Dooku, they've improved the animation of people being influenced by his exposed weakness, and then some clipping issues and lip sync issues were fixed. And fixed an issue with Bosk's Predator Resilience star card, which apparently granted too much damage, and they also corrected the values of the anti-hero rocket star card on Boba Fett for accuracy. The ability should deal 12 points of that bonus damage per rocket at epic rarity. For Palpatine, they fixed an issue that would occasionally slow down a character's overall speed and animations when being affected by Emperor Palpatine's abilities, and also an issue that would cause lightsaber heroes' blocking functionality to break if they block the electrocute ability inside the Dark Aura ability range. Same goes for Yoda, where there was a fix for Yoda's blocking if you would use the presence ability right after a crowd control ability was used on him. And apparently Vader's deflection stamina star card had no functionality on epic rarity, but now that has now been fixed. For Solo, they fixed a issue where the shoulder charge would not knock people over if used within close range, which is a very good change, something I've noticed. I didn't know it was just for short range though, but definitely going to be important for heroes versus villains balance. Also, a blocking issue for Grievous fixed after using Unrelenting Advance, and also Chewbacca had an issue with one of his star cards not given any functionality. Clipping issue fixed on Phasma, and improved the smoke for Lando where you could see through it sometimes. And here's the big one where Kylo Ren, basically if you combined his freeze and pull ability, would cause the blocking functionality of other lightsaber heroes to break, which has now been fixed, so hopefully there will be no more blocking issues. Some matchmaking issues has been fixed for Galactic Assault and Strike, and some invisible walls been removed on Jakku. And they've added the Hailfire droids firing missiles as a Battle Beyond element on Geonosis. That's probably going to be fairly noticeable, because those kind of pink-purple missiles that we see in the movie are, well, they stand out, so I'm actually kind of excited to see how that looks. And some arcade fixes for the Separatist droid animations. And as for squad spawn changes, they've enabled the messaging for when a player is being spawned on, but no battle points are awarded in that event. I'm assuming that means that they haven't managed to fix that abuse where people get like 1,000,000 battle points, but they still wanted you to get credit for it, so I guess that's like the middle ground. And they also fixed the no sound issue when actually spectating on the squad spawn screen. And thank God they fixed an issue where the ATST, AAT and STAP would not receive damage from basic lightsaber attacks. Maybe it's actually going to be worth trying to attack them now, just don't get run over. And they fixed an issue where the crosshair on the ATRT would not align with the fired projectile, and improved the functionality on the horizon level meter of the ATTE, and polished VFX when using the LAAT ray gun. As for changes to classes and special units, I already mentioned this, but they have fixed the issue where you would not be properly outlined with scan dart, night vision scopes, and binoculars, same as for the heroes. And then mostly some visual changes to weapons looking weird and similarly. And I've also increased the damage reduction of the bodyguard card to actually make you able to tank a thermal detonator if you're a non-heavy. So quite interesting change there. Some fixes to the emote wheel, as well as the fact that you're able to re-trigger an emote quickly at the end of the emote animation, which seems to be more like how it was in the previous game. And they've improved the readability of play names in the chat against certain backgrounds. Some idle kick rules, errors for unlocking emotes, updated user agreement, fixed lightsaber audio in the menu, and some animation issues for the heroes. And I think that brings it to an end. Again, that is a lot of things to go through, probably the longest news update I have done in a very long time. So I apologize if I went too much into detail or too little into detail. It's hard to find that balance. Again, I will link both of these in the description below if you want to read into them yourselves. But I thought I'd cover it as much in depth as I possibly could, because I know you guys like to hear all those juicy details. And now I can actually go to bed with ease of mind, knowing that all this information is out, and when I get up tomorrow morning, it's all about playing Capital Supremacy, making some videos for you guys, and then streaming. Thank you guys very much for watching, and as always, may the Force be with you.